Hello, my name is Colby Ronald Griffin. I am a student at the University of South Alabama, and I'm currently taking the course EDM 310. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Dr. Laureen Fregeau, who is a professor here in the Education Department at the University of South Alabama. And Dr. Fregeau has 30 years of education experience under her belt, so I'm really looking forward to tapping into some of that knowledge today. And so, to get started, we previously discussed that you are an advocate of project-based learning. That's something that we have talked a lot about in EDM 310. And so my first question to you is, specifically, what have you found in your experience makes project-based learning an effective technique in the classroom?
A lot of different things. Okay. So first of all, you can incorporate most learning styles into project-based learning because it's very flexible. And I like that. I also it's very creative. A lot of the projects that were done in my class involve being creative, like performances and posters and just things that students can bring their own ideas and creativity to, and I think that's an important part of project-based learning. It's also collaborative, and so students are learning how to collaborate with each other. At the same time, they're learning content, so they're learning a skill that they need to have as a teacher. It also, there are some drawbacks to it, okay? One of the major drawbacks that I see is that it's sometimes hard to get all students to be equally involved in the project, and so I've incorporated a few new things this semester in Sakai. I'm using discussion forums so that as students are actually communicating with each other and setting up the project and doing things, they're having to communicate and post communications on discussion forums for the specific project. And so that way I can track what they're doing. And it's helped some, but there are always students who are just still figuring that, they don't really have to do it because someone else is going to do it for them.
Right.
And, and that's just something that is, I think, it's difficult to avoid.
Right.
I think there are always going to be students like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, I'm actually a former student of yours, and I took education and diverse society with you. And I was going to ask you really quickly, if you don't mind, how do you feel like diversity affects project-based learning for teachers?
That's a good question. I think that because it's a collaborative assignment, students bring their different perspectives from their cultural backgrounds into the assignment. So if it's something on the history of education, they're going to, and they have a particular cultural background, they're going to probably want to find out more about that particular cultural background in terms of history, and then they bring that to the other students who then get to learn about that aspect of the assignment that they might not otherwise have paid any attention to because it's really not important to them. I think also that in terms of collaboration and interaction with other students, how you communicate with people is culturally based.
Right.
And so if you have particular rules that you're following in terms of how you communicate with other people, then certainly within project-based learning, that's going to be a factor. And so that means that everybody is going to have to learn what the cultural rules that each other has are for communication. So it's an opportunity to learn aspects of culture that are sort of like hidden in most types of assignments and that you might not otherwise ever come across.
And I can attest to that firsthand, especially with the projects we did in your class, specifically, the group members and I, whenever we were going into doing these projects, and they were culturally based, so we learned so much. And I could just go around, just the group members I had, we just went around, and a lot of us were, we were very enlightened to a lot of new things culturally. So I think that's very important. Something else I wanted to touch on, which is a key not only to project-based learning but to education in general, is motivation. When speaking of project-based learning, you're asking the right questions to get the students to move forward with the project, kind of take the reins and run with it, And that's like a big weight falls on the teacher to motivate and to ask those right questions. So in your experience, how do you feel like is the best, not only just in project-based learning, but in education in general, how do you feel is the best way to motivate students?
Student-centered learning, I think, is one of the biggest motivators, and that means that sometimes the assignments need to be about the student. So, for example, I want students to understand the immigrant experience. So then I ask students to find out what the immigrant experience was for their ancestors that were immigrants.
Right.
And so students need to, and that's exciting for a lot of students. Some
Absolutely.
students it isn't exciting for because they can't find anything out.
Right.
But then there are alternatives that they can do. But it's something where they are involved with themselves and their own families, and they're
Exactly.
talking to their grandparents and to other family members, and they're looking in old documents in their family's, household or something, and it becomes personal.
Right.
And I think that that's a big motivator when it becomes personal in your learning, and you can connect the learning not just to the content that you need to learn, but to yourself as well.
Right, right. And that's the perfect example what you said, like personalized. When you start getting into people's personal areas, that's where you can really tap into their potential. I know specifically for me, and as an example, I always responded really well to professors that were able to do that. And we just went over some things where I listened to a video lecture, and it was a technique was mentioned called a head fake, to where you got content to cover, but you use it in a way to where they may not be thinking exactly what they're doing is quote unquote we're getting stuff done. It's more or less like we've got computer programming things to work out, so let's program video games. And everybody's into video games, so they're going to love doing it. And then on the flip side, they're learning computer programming. So and